Frances Kuo, the University Illinois researcher known for her window studies in public housing, has also examined the relationship between ADHD and outdoor activity. Her studies have been small but suggestive. In one experiment, exposure to nature reduced reported symptoms of ADHD in children threefold compared with staying indoors. In another, she had 17 children aged 8 to 11 with ADHD walk for 20 minutes with a guide in 3 different settings: a residential neighborhood, an urban downtown street, and a park setting. After the park walk, they performed so much better memorizing numbers in backward sequence that the improvement was equal to the difference between having ADHD or not having it, as well as to the difference between not being medicated at all and experiencing the peak effects of common ADHD medication. More recently, a study of 2,000 children in Barcelona found that those who spent more time playing in green spaces were reported by parents to have somewhat milder symptoms of inattention and hyperactivity. In a 2004 paper, Kuo and her colleague, Andrea Faber-Taylor, proposed an explanation for how attention restoration theory might apply. The right prefrontal cortex, the brain's organizing, judging, task-focusing real estate, is known to be less active in children with ADHD. If nature allows the right prefrontal cortex to recharge, it could boost attention in these kids. ADHD symptoms, it turns out, are somewhat contextual. If you're the sort of person who thrives on chaos and stimulation like a lot of extreme athletes, sitting in school all day may well suck out your soul. But with the rise of industrialism, educators thought all kids should be in standardized classrooms. ADHD got its start 150 years ago when compulsory education got started, said Stephen Hinshaw, a psychologist at the University of California, Berkeley. In that sense, you could say it's a social construct. Not only will exploratory kids feel bored and inadequate in conventional schools, he said, the constrained setting actually makes their symptoms worse. Maria Montessori went so far as to suggest in 1920 that middle schoolers should ditch lecture-based instruction altogether and head for farm and nature schools where they can move around and learn by doing. For kids like Zach Smith, school feels especially stifling and rule-bound. They act up. They get moved into an even more restrictive environment, sometimes with chain-link fences, guards, and neurotropic meds that go beyond ADHD to deal with the ensuing anxiety, depression, and aggression. Sometimes they end up in trouble, or, as Zach feared might happen to him, getting gooned in the middle of night by burly strangers who would pack him off to a residential therapeutic program that may look like Outward Bound in the brochure, but end up feeling like a gulag. Interestingly, researchers have observed similar patterns in lab rats, who, let's face it, suffer the ultimate cosmic gooning. When Jaak Panksepp, a neuroscientist at Washington State University, restricted the free exploration and play of his young rats, their frontal lobes, which control executive function, failed to grow properly. As adults, they behaved like rat-style sociopaths. We had the insight that if animals don't play, if there are not sufficient spaces for them to engage, they develop play hunger, said Panksepp. They have impulse control problems and eventually problems with social interactions. In contrast, animals given time to play appear to develop deeper and more durable neural hardware. Panksepp studies show that just 30-minute play sessions help young rats release brain growth factors and activate hundreds of genes in the frontal cortex. He points out that while common stimulant medications for ADHD like Ritalin and Adderall may improve attention skills and academic performance in many kids, they do so at the cost of killing the exploration urge, at least temporarily. We know these are anti-play drugs, he said. That is clear and unambiguous. The bigger question is whether the drugs, and all the enforced sedentary behavior, squeeze the adventure impulse out of kids longer term. Psychologists tend to disagree on this point, but the truth is, no one really knows. It's not a boutique question. Of the 16.4 million diagnosed kids in America, half are taking prescription stimulants, an increase of 28% since 2007. When some of the teens first arrived at SOAR, they were still putting their clothes on backward. They forgot to eat, or they couldn't stop. They lashed out in anger, and they were easily frustrated. ADHD symptoms appear to express themselves differently in boys and girls. The classic symptoms in boys, which are better understood, are hyperactivity, impulsivity, and distractibility. We all sit somewhere on the continuum of these traits, but people with more severe symptoms appear to have different chemistry in the parts of their brain governing reward, movement, and attention. They may have trouble listening or sitting still, and they get distracted by external stimuli. Easily bored, they tend to be risk takers, looking for charged activities that help flood their brains with the feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, which otherwise get gummed up in the ADHD brain. Kids with ADHD are more likely to suffer head injuries, accidentally ingest poisons, and take street drugs. Long-standing research suggests that kids like Zach, and indeed most kids, would be better off in dynamic outdoor learning environments from the very beginning. As Aaron Kenny, founder of Cedarsong Nature School on Vashon Island, Washington, has put it, "Children cannot bounce off the walls if we take away the walls." It's what the man who founded kindergarten had in mind in the first place. Friedrich Froebel was born in 1782 near Weimar, in the heart of Germany's ancient forests and lush vales. A student of natural history who came of age under the spell of Romanticism, he was a lover of the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. "Everything is good as it comes from the hands of the author of nature," Rousseau wrote to Froebel's delight. But everything degenerates in the hands of man. In Émile, Rousseau made a case for cultivating curiosity and freedom in childhood. This radical notion came to influence every aspect of progressive education. In Froebel's day, children under the age of 7 typically stayed at home or were farmed out to creches of convenience. Froebel understood that an education filled with nature and art could instill a lifelong readiness to learn. He believed children would also pick up emotional skills like empathy, as well as a profound sense of the interconnection of all living things. After working in primary education for a number of years, he started a school for small children in 1837. It was while walking in the woods, that he came up with the name Kindergarten. In it, children would absorb the natural world through all their senses. They would grow plants outdoors, exercise, dance, and sing. They would manipulate simple objects like blocks, wooden spheres, and colored papers, thus learning, almost despite themselves, the universal laws of geometry, form, physics, and design. Froebel didn't believe in lockstep lesson plans. Children, he said, should be guided largely by their own curiosity and self-activity. For a while, the idea caught on, but the Prussian government, fearful of instilling free play and, by extension, free atheistic thinking, shut down public kindergartens before Froebel's death in 1852. Still, his ideas resonated with scores of wealthy, well-connected women who became phenomenally successful international missionaries for the cause. It was the seed pearl of the modern era, and it was called kindergarten, argues Norman Brosterman in his compelling history, Inventing Kindergarten. Childhood would never quite be the same. Although, as kindergarten spread to other nations, including America, the concept changed in ways that would have made Froebel hurl an abacus. He had opposed formal lessons for this age group, and didn't even want alphabetical letters on blocks. But in the late 19th century, educators saw the need to prepare children, especially working-class children, for an industrial work life. Kindergarten shifted to more time indoors, and the lessons became more programmatic. Despite a brief flirtation with nature schools in the 1960s and 1970s, American kindergarten continued its relentless slouch into sit-down academics. But Froebel's nature-centric ideas didn't disappear from Europe. To this day, European kids aren't taught reading and math in earnest until they reach age 7. Germany has more than 1,000 forest kindergartens called Waldkindergärten, and they are growing in popularity across Northern Europe. In these preschools, kids are out in all kinds of weather, playing with natural materials and pretty much having a ball. I'd visited a school called Athlone in Perthshire, Scotland, where kids ran happily around climbing trees, playing house in twig teepees, and hosting a funeral for a dead frog. For snack time, a 4-year-old boy helped light a campfire for making popcorn. The school's director, Claire Warden, is a big fan of kids and fire. She's also a proponent of preschoolers handling knives and challenging themselves physically. She'd told me how after a large tree fell over during a storm, the children had spent days sawing and pounding off sharp bits to make it safer to climb upon. This, she explained, launched a typical nature-based curriculum. The kids improved their manual dexterity, learned about cause and effect, and practiced teamwork. Warden knows some of these ideas might be shocking to American parents and their notions of bubble-wrapped childhoods. "We can't avoid all risk," she'd said. As if on cue, a boy in yellow boots stalked by carrying a junior hacksaw. Junior hacksaw would be an oxymoron in America, but here it's another teaching tool. Earlier I'd seen the same boy with a potato peeler. "What we do is hazard assessment, not risk avoidance," she'd said. "Schools that are boring and not engaging will end up costing parents and taxpayers millions when these children are teens." Today, 1/10 of preschoolers in Scandinavia spend nearly their entire days outside, and another huge percentage spends a significant portion outdoors. In Finland, outdoor play is integrated into the day throughout primary school to an astonishing degree. It's common for students to be turned out for 15 minutes out of every hour. When I was in Finland, I'd asked a 6th grade teacher named Johanna Peltola why. She was, like many Finns, extremely pragmatic. "When they go outside and get fresh air, they think more clearly," she said. And yet, while American education experts sing the praises of the Finnish school system, celebrating the nation's high spot in global academic standings, they routinely ignore the fresh air factor. Outdoor play isn't even mentioned in Amanda Ripley's chapter on Finland in The Smartest Kids in the World. Interestingly, Finland reports the same percentage of children diagnosed with ADHD as the United States, about 11%, mostly boys. But while most adolescents in the US are taking medication, most in Finland are not. What Froebel believed, and the Finns practice, science has affirmed. Nature play enhances at least 2 activities known to develop children's cognitive and emotional development: exercise and exploratory play. A large meta-analysis of dozens of studies concluded that physical activity in school-age children, 4 to 18, increases performance in a trove of brain matter: perceptual skills, IQ, verbal ability, mathematic ability, academic readiness. The effect was strongest in younger children. Even more intriguing, researchers at Pennsylvania State University have found that early social skills matter more than academic ones in predicting future success. They followed 750 children for 20 years. The children whose kindergarten teachers rated them as having strong abilities to cooperate, resolve conflicts, and listen to others were less likely later to be unemployed, develop substance abuse problems, get arrested, live in public housing, or go on welfare. Germany sponsored an even more ambitious study in the 1970s. There, researchers tracked graduates of 100 kindergartens. Half the programs were play-based, although not necessarily outdoors, and half were academic and instruction-based. The academic students made initial gains, but by grade 4 they had fallen behind their play-based peers on every scholastic and socio-emotional measure used. In a move that would have warmed Froebel's art stations, Germany reversed its trend toward academic kindergartens. But, alas, not the United States, where little kids spend more time at their desks than ever. Preschoolers in the United States average just 48 minutes of exercise a day in their schools, even though the recommended level is 2 hours, according to a 2015 paper published in Pediatrics. Of that 48 minutes, only 33 minutes is outside. A 2009 study in pediatrics found that 30% of third graders get fewer than 15 minutes of recess a day. And another study found that 39% of African American students had no recess, compared to 15% of white students. Parents aren't helping much either. Jane Clark, a University of Maryland professor of kinesiology, calls toddlers containerized kids, as they spend increasing time in car seats, high chairs, and strollers, and then shift into sedentary media consumption. According to the Outdoor Foundation's research, funded by the U.S. National Park Service and outdoor industry manufacturers, participation in outdoor activities declined among all children, but declined the most, 15%, among 6 to 12-year-olds between 2006 and 2014. Those figures include hiking, camping, fishing, cycling, paddling, skateboarding, surfing, wildlife viewing, and other activities, and do not include organized sports. In 2004, 70% of U.S. mothers recalled that they had played freely outside themselves when they were children, yet only 31% allowed their children to do the same, despite a drop in crime since then. British children seem equally tethered. Since the 1970s, their children's radius of activity, the area around the home where kids are allowed to roam unsupervised, has declined by almost 90%, according to a report by the National Trust. While 80% of 7- and 8-year-olds walked to school in 1971, by 1990, fewer than 10% did so. In the UK, 2/3 of school children do not know acorns come from trees. At SOAR, many students arrive on meds, and many stay on them. At all times, the instructors carry sealed messenger bags full of pharmaceuticals strapped to their torsos like baby marsupials. Though Wilson emphasized that SOAR is not a way to get kids off ADHD medication, some do find that they can taper off. Zach's parents told me they were planning to toss his anxiety drugs during his upcoming holiday break, and they expected to lower the dose of his stimulant as well. The changes in him have been nothing short of miraculous, said his mother, Marlene DePakel. Now he's just happy. If, as the research suggests, outdoor free play is so important to kids' physical and mental health, you might expect to see evidence of illness during this seismic generational shift indoors. And in fact, that's exactly what you see, although it's impossible to draw a direct line to a particular cause. The stats are alarming. Preschoolers are the fastest-growing market for antidepressants in the United States. More than 10,000 American preschoolers are being medicated for ADHD. Teenagers today have 5 to 8 times more clinically significant scores for anxiety and depression compared to young people born in the 1950s. Since 1999, the U.S. suicide rate has increased for nearly all groups, with the steepest rise, 200%, among girls 10 to 14 years old. It's well known that childhood obesity rates have tripled, and allergy and asthma rates have increased dramatically in the U.S. in the last 3 decades. According to data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, nearly 1 in 10 children has a vitamin D deficiency. That's 7.6 million children. And, get this, 2/3, another 50.8 million, are considered vitamin D insufficient. We need sunlight for all sorts of bodily processes, from regulating our sleep and diurnal rhythms to facilitating proper bone growth to boosting immunity. The problem has gotten so bad that rickets, a disease caused by lack of vitamin D, which has been virtually eradicated, has begun to show up in pockets of the UK and America. The incidence has quadrupled in the 2 countries' children in the last 15 years. When you put little kids in green environments, even if it's just some lawn and shrubbery, they start moving. In schools with conventional urban playgrounds, the boys tend to run around more than the girls. But studies in Sweden show the exercise gap between boys and girls narrows in more naturalistic environments. Nature levels gendered play. The kids in forest kindergartens also tend to get sick less often than their indoor peers. And they host a healthier, more diverse array of microbacteria in their bodies. Zach Smith is one of the lucky ones. Privileged kids have tons of options, from summer camp to beautifully landscaped schools. But if we really care about children's health, connecting more kids to nature and shaking up early and elementary education, we're going to have to figure it out where most of us actually live and work. In cities, in housing developments and neighborhoods, and in public and private schools. I asked my son, now in 7th grade in D.C., how many minutes of recess he gets per day. Recess? We probably haven't had recess in 3 months. This was a problem. I called the head of his junior high. I know, she said, putting on her appease the unhinged mother voice. I wish they could go outside more too, but it's been too muddy, and then the corridors get muddy. In other words, it was a janitorial problem. In Finland, kids keep their boots by the front door. Maybe schools in the United States don't need more iPads and test prep. Maybe they just need more wellies. Frankly, there's no time to waste. While active exploration improves learning in both kids and adults, it's adolescents like Zach, whose prefrontal cortex is in the very midst of laying down a lifetime of neurons, who seem to benefit the most. John Green and Megan Eddy, biobehavioral psychologists at the University of Vermont, exercised some adult and teenaged rats, and then gave them a task to remember how to find food in a maze. The young rats who exercised bested the adults who exercised, doing as well as rats on Ritalin. It seemed the playful, exploratory, and physical adolescent years exist to boost learning in mammals, just as Soares Wilson intuited. Or, as Green more formally put it, the adolescent prefrontal cortex is ready to be molded by environmental experience. So there you have it. The time is now. There's a limited window of opportunity to best launch these kids, and perhaps, in doing so, to safeguard a future of innovative exploration by the very kids who are wired to do it better than anyone else. The ADHD population is an advance guard. If they can recognize how to better adapt their environments for their brains, there's hope for the rest of us. One thing is clear. Human brains seem to grow best when they get some time outside. After many years languishing in the Formica-filled classrooms of West Hartford, Zach Smith was ready. He and his pals gathered around the fire pit back at camp, bellies full of hamburgers and bread and butter pickles. It was very dark out. Tomorrow, all 14 kids would make it the 4 pitches up Seneca Rocks. A couple of days after that, they'd backpack across the Dolly Sods wilderness area, and then they'd visit Stonewall Jackson's grave and read poetry written by the general's sister-in-law. For now, they were tired, if not exactly mellow. Zach's job for the day was Captain Planet, meaning mighty taker out of trash. Another kid named Max was Scribe. At 16, Max was an expeller of colossal farts, and proud of it. I don't do anything halfway in the outdoors, he said. He had shared with me on the trail that he was also an expert squirrel hunter, climber, and river runner. When he is done with school, he intends to find a job guiding. Beturbaned in a purple bandana, he opened the group journal and prepared to record notes of the day's events under the narrow beam of a red headlamp. Zach was lying on his back and looking up at the stars. He was impressed.